Sachas Bava Metzia Daf Yud Veiz. We begin with the Mishnah several lines into the Daf, and we'll have another Mishnah near the end of the Daf. First, Mishnah discusses the halachos of one's son, workers, avadim, or wife being kaina in a Metzia for him. And the next Mishnah will take us into the discussion of finding a star, which will take us into Hilchos Shtaris, which will take us to the end of the first parak of the Masechta. So first, let's begin with the Mishnah, which tells us the basic halachos, two categories of members of one's household who find a mitzvah, find a found object, whether they are kainet for him or not. So if it is a son or daughter that are ketanim, an eved who is kenani, or a wife who is married to him, then they are kainet for him, and therefore the father, the adnain, the husband is kainet these mitzvahs. The reason for the son who's a katan, the Gemara will explain. The reason for the daughter who's a katana is explained at length in the Gemara in Ksubis. The reason for the Eved is that the guf of the Eved belongs to him, and therefore anything he does is for him on his behalf. And about his wife, that's a takanas chazal, because otherwise it'll create Ava. He's feeding her, and she's keeping her own mitzvahs to herself. Now the second category is a son or a daughter who are gedolim, an Eved who's an Eved Ivri, and a woman who's Megureshes, used to be his wife, now she's Megureshes, even though she didn't get Iksubi yet. All these keep their own mitzias. And the reason here is Gedalim, of course, they are independent. If it's an Eved Ivri, he's just a worker, and a worker can do whatever he wants for himself, like we've seen in the Gemara earlier. And about a Isha Megureshes, of course, she's independent, she has her own funds at that time. So let's begin the Gemara. So the Gemara quotes Shmuel, says, what is the reason that he found that when a katan, a male katan, finds an object, he's kind for the father? We've seen that the daughter has a halacha, there's a kasav called shvach and la'avia, but here we're talking about a son. So why should that go to the father? So Shmuel explains, the reason is because when he picks it up, he had in mind to give it to the father, he had in mind to be kind for the father, and the way you could see that is because when a child picks up a found object, he automatically runs to bring it to the father. He doesn't keep it by him at all. So therefore you understand that that's what his Hagbah was for. So says the Gemara, this seems to indicate that Shmuel holds that a katan does not have any acquisitions for himself midday raisa. The midday raisa, they go all to his father. So the Gemara asks, is a kasha where Shmuel paskins like one opinion of Brisa that seems to say otherwise. Brisa is discussing somebody who's working in the field. He's a hired worker, and he's harvesting the field, and he's dropping leket behind him. Can his wife and children pick up the leket? Can they walk behind him in the field and pick up the leket and be zeichenet? Now, if they count as rich, or whoever's being kained counts as rich, then they have no right to take it. If they count as poor, then they can take it. So says the Bryce as follows. If he's a hired worker, so he doesn't own any land, then he's considered to be poor. And of course, the son and the wife that are picking it up, they are also poor. Everybody who's involved here is poor, they're aniyim, and therefore they could be zeichen and they could walk behind him, no issue. If, however, he is a sharecropper, which means that he gets a percentage of the field as his salary, percentage of the produce of the field, that means that he owns a large amount of this, then he's considered to be wealthy, and he himself, the sharecropper, cannot take leket. And then the question becomes, can his son or his wife take leket, and are they kind of in it for themselves? So the Tanna Kama here holds they cannot take the leket, because when they're kind of in it, they're kind of in it for the husband and the father, and he's not right to take leket. According to Rabbi Yossi, they could take leket because they're kind of in it for themselves. They themselves have no land. They're not being in it for the father. Says Shmuel, the lach is like Rabbi Yossi. So you see Shmuel is paskening that when a katan picks up a hefker object, he's kind of for himself, not for the father. Similar to what we said over here, where he's explaining pshat that the katan is zeichenet for the father. So we answer this, not a kasha. Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yossi. Shmuel holds that the katan is a zeichenet, but here he's just explaining pshat in this Tana, who disagrees, who holds like the chacham. Says the Gemara, but you can't even tell me that Rabbi Yossi holds that way. It's a contradiction. How could Rabbi Yossi possibly be holding that the katan is zeichenet for himself? So we see otherwise. I have a Mishnah that says that a cheresh, shaitu, or katan who finds something, so they are only kainit midrabanan. And the Tanna Kama says that it's only mitnei darki shalom, to prevent fights. Rabbi Yossi says it's somebody who takes it from them is gezel gomer, he's a real thief. But if Chiz explained, only midrabanan is he a real thief. Now the difference between him and the Tanna Kama is, could you take the person who stole it to court and take it away from him? According to him, you could actually take it away from the thief in court. However, this is only midrabanan. So you see midaraisa, katan picking something up, according to Yossi, has no zechiyah. So what's pshat here? How come he says that the katan could collect after in the field? He could walk behind his father, the sharecropper, and be zeichenin if his father's not roy, and the katan has no zechiyah for himself midaraisa. So midaraisa it's belongs to the father. Midaraisa is no rights. So Abaye answers, it's what's happening here is that the poor people are miyayish, and therefore it becomes hefker, and it's not for aniyim anymore. You're right; they're not qualifying aniyim. However, people see that this guy is working in the field, he's harvesting, and his kids and his wife are walking behind him. So they realize that everything will be taken and gone. There's preferential treatment here. They're not going to get anything. So therefore, they're all miyayish. Becomes hefker, not just leket, it becomes hefker mamish, and therefore, even though they should not be able to be zeichen because it counts as a shirim because it goes to the husband, to the father, they are allowed to pick it up. That's what Abaye says. So Adam Masna asked Abaye, how did they have a right to do that? Let's say you plant the lion in your field, so that nobody could take the leket from your field. And then you say, oh, it's hefker, so now I could take the leket for myself. So you're scaring away the poor people unjustly, and therefore it's going to go to people who aren't qualified to take leket. How can that be okay? Therefore, Rava gives a different explanation. Rava's explanation is that the aniyim themselves want this arrangement to happen, and therefore it's a takana, as it were, that they want this sharecropper to be able to have his family collecting in the field after him. And the reason they want that is because there'll come a time when they'll be hired as a sharecropper, and they're going to want their own families to be able to collect after them. Therefore, in order to have that entitlement for themselves, they allow it for others. Okay, this is all Shmuel's explanation of the Mishnah. The Gemara says that Rabbi Chia bar Abba disagrees and says a different shot. He says the reason that the katan picks up this Metzia and it goes to his father is because we're talking about a katan, we're talking about someone who's Seimach al Shulchan Aviv. Not necessarily he's under the age of 13, just that he is living in his father's house and he's eating at his father's table. A gadol would refer to someone who is not eating at his father's table, someone who's living independently, even if he's under the age of 13. What's the significance of that? Since his father's feeding him, if he were to be keeping his earnings and his found objects to himself, that would create some discontent in the house, and therefore we are mitakein that it goes to the father. Okay, next the Gemara looks at a different line in the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said that if somebody has an eved or a shivcha that is ivri, they can keep their own found objects. The Gemara asked, how is it different than a worker? Allah is, if you hire a worker to do a specific job and he finds an object, he keeps that for himself. However, if you hire him generally for all types of work, then when he finds something, he's working for the boss, and therefore the found object belongs to the boss. So an Eved Ivri is just like that. He's hired, he's purchased as it were, and he's hired for all types of work that he does. So the found object should go to the boss. Why does he get to keep it for himself? So Mari gives three answers. His first answer is we're talking about an Eved Ivri who has a very specific, highly valued profession. He, let's say, drills holes in pearls to string them, and therefore the owner doesn't want him doing anything else. He hired him only for that job. He doesn't want him doing anything else. And he's not willing to have him take off from his work in order to do something else. It's not worth it for him. So when he finds an object, what he's doing is he's taking off from work, and it's his own decision. And he has to pay the adain for the lost work time. He can keep the object for himself because he's saying, okay, I'm not working for you anymore because you don't want me to do this, and I'm going to pay you for the lost time. But his found object is for himself. The second answer is that he picked up this object as he was working, and therefore it's totally independent of his work. It didn't cause any bitul malacha at all, and therefore it's something he can do for himself. It's not part of what he did for the boss. He did something else for the boss at the same time. It's not a steer. Rav Papa answers, the case where we say that the hired worker has to give the found object to the boss, that's where the boss hired him to find objects. That's, let's say, the river flooded and it filled the river banks with fish or other objects that were in the river, and he hired him. He said, go collect all the things that are on the land after the river recedes. He's hiring him to find things, so therefore that's his work. However, in our case, he didn't hire him to find things, he hired him to do something else, or even he hired him for general. So, and even if he's just an Eved Ivri, and therefore something that he finds is independent of that, it has nothing to do with it. The Gemara now refers back to the Mishnah and asks about the shivcha specifically. The Gemara says you have a shivcha, meaning an amavriya, that keeps her own metzias. What's the case? If she has simone vagros, she has physical signs of adulthood, then she goes free. She shouldn't be an Amariya anymore. If she doesn't have Simani Bagas, it means she's a Ketana. She's a Ketana, so then how does she keep the found object herself? The Metzia should go to her father, as we saw the halachas that any Ketana Metzia goes to her father. If you want to say that she doesn't have a father, then she shouldn't be an Amariya either. Reish Lakish has already said in Maseches Kiddushin that a Amariya whose father dies goes free from being an Amariya. He brought a Kavachaymer. He said that Simanim take her out of the Rishus of the Adain, but not the Rishus of the Av. So Misa, which takes her out of the Rishus of the Av, certainly takes her out of the Rishus of the Adain. So what's Pshat? So the Gemara says at first, well, maybe this is just a kasha on Reish Lakish's halacha. Reish Lakish has already been rejected. There was already a tiyufta on Reish Lakish in Maseches Kiddushin. So here's another tiyufta, that it can be that the case here has to be that her father had died. And it's a kasha on Reish Lakish who says that she goes free when her father died, because she's not going free here, she's still an Amma. Versus another could be a different shot here. The shot could be that she has a father, and her found object will go to her father. The Mishnah said that she keeps it. It just meant that it doesn't go to her master. And we said that the Adain doesn't get to keep it. Instead, it goes to her. Going to her, meaning it goes to her, and therefore it'll end up by her father. Okay, last line in the Mishnah was that a wife who's divorced, even if she didn't get a ksuba yet, if she's Megoreshes, she gets to keep her own Metzia. The Gemara says, Pasha, she keeps her own Metzia, she's a free woman. So the Gemara answers, we're not talking about what she's actually Vadim Megoreshes, we're talking about what she's a Safik Megoreshes, what we call Megoreshes Ve'inui Megoreshes. And the reason that we have to say this chiddush is because Mizir said in Shmuel that since she's suffering Megoreshes, her husband is still obligated to support her financially. He's still feeding her. The entire reason that a wife's found object goes to her husband is because of that support that her husband's giving her. So here, since she's continuing to receive support, you may say that she should give the found object to the husband or the Safik husband who's supporting her for the same reason. So Gemara says here, though, it doesn't apply. The only reason that Chazal said that a woman gives her found object to her husband is because since he's supporting her, if she won't give it to him, it'll create hatred between them. But here, he's already trying to divorce her, so the hatred's already there. So there's no point in her giving him the found objects. Now, we begin our next Mishnah, which discusses the sugya of contracts. Now, we know that a shtar is a loan document, or at least that's how we'll be using it here, where a malveh, lender, lends money to the leveh, who is the borrower. The contract allows the malveh to collect, so the malveh holds on to the contract until he collects. It allows him to take him to court and collect. Sometimes the shtar would have written into it that there's a lien on the property, and therefore if the leveh doesn't have cash to pay, the malveh could take the property away. Not only could he take the property away, but even if he sold property after the time that the loan was made, he could collect from the person who bought it. The lien outlives the ownership, and the person who bought it should have known. He should have been careful. And the fact that he decided to buy a property that had a lien on is his own fault. He's going to lose the property, and he'll have to go back to the leveh to get his money back. That's called achrayus nechasim. Now, the Mishnah discusses what happens if somebody finds a lost shtar on the floor. Should he return it or not? So the Mishnah says that if it has a chayes nechasim, if it has a lien on sold land, he should not return it because the Beis Din will collect from it. If it has no chayes nechasim on it, so now you have a machlokes. The Tanna Kama says you could return it to the malveh because Beis Din won't collect from it. The Gemara is obviously going to ask, Beis Din will collect it, they just won't collect from sold land. That's Rabbi Meir. Chachamim say you still cannot collect it because you still cannot return it because the Beis Din will collect it. So we have that if there is a chayes nechasim, if there is a lien on that you could collect from the buyer, then everyone agrees don't return it to the malveh. If there's no chayes nechasim, the machlokes, we should return it to the malveh or not. So the Gemara asks right away, why should you return it to the malveh? Is the leveh moide that he owes the money still, or does he say he paid it back? If the leveh is moide that he owes the money, so why would you ever not return it to the malveh? Everybody's moide. And if the leveh is claiming that he does not owe the money, he says he paid it already, or the shtar is forged, so what does it make a difference if there's no shibud nechasim? How could anybody hold that you should give it back to the malveh, even though you won't collect from land that's been sold after the loan was made, you will still collect from cash that he has, or land that he has not sold. So why would you give it back to the Malva if the Lev is claiming that it's not fair and it's not just? So the Gemara answers, we're talking about a situation where the Lev is Moide. However, I'm not going to return it to the Malva because I'm afraid that the date on the star is wrong, and that really the loan was made in Tishrei, but the date was written in Nisan, and therefore property that was sold between Nisan and Tishrei is not included in the shibud. However, they're going to use this to collect from that, because although that land was bought by the lekech before the loan was made, the date says that it was after the loan was made, and therefore they will illegally get together and collect from the lekech. Says the Gemara, if that's concerned, you should have the concern on every star. Maybe every star you see the date is wrong. Why only here? The Gemara says, no, since it fell, since it was dropped, that is an indication that something's up with the star. People don't usually lose a star. The fact that they lost it seems to indicate that it was possible, and maybe the date was wrong, and therefore we have to be careful with this and not return it. Says the Gemara, okay, if you have this concern on every star which is not a standard star, so what about a case where the Levi comes to court without a Malva? And he says, write me a star that I borrowed money from such and such. He's not here, but write me a star that I borrowed from him. So we should also be concerned maybe the date is wrong, because why is the Malva not here? Something funny is going on. Perhaps he wants to entrap a lekach. He wants to sell land soon, and he's not going to borrow the money until afterwards, so it won't be included in that lien on the sold property. There won't be a lien on that. However, he wants to make a star from now, and he wants to make it appear as if the loan happened now, and have it apply to this land that's already been sold. So we should have that concern. So our answers, the case here is where he's being mishabed all the property that he owns from now. He doesn't have to wait for the loan to be mishabed all the property that he owns. He could put the lien on his land whenever he wants. He could say, I'm putting the lien on my land right now. Anything that I have now, I'm putting the lien on it, even if the loan doesn't happen now. If that's what he's ordering, so he's the right to do that. And in a case like that, there is no nafkamina whether the malva is here or not, or even when the loan actually happens, he's mishabed his land already from now to pay it off.